The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom will without a doubt become one of the most interesting sequels in gaming history, and it improves upon Breath of the Wild in nearly all the important ways you could imagine, especially if you are like myself and were not perhaps the biggest fan of the previous game as many others were. Now, in regards to my playtime after beating Tears of the Kingdom, I had clocked in 135 hours, spanning 18 consecutive days playing the game at an average of 7.5 hours a day, until I finally decided it was time to beat the main story, knowing full well that I still had a lot of shrines and side quests to complete, but I'll explain why this was a good choice to do so later in this review. However, to say Tears of the Kingdom grabbed my attention is obviously an understatement, and I have a lot to discuss. So I want to thank you first of all for your time and attention for this review, and if you want to support reviews like this on the channel, the best way to do so is to hit the like button and leave me a comment on your thoughts of Tears of the Kingdom, since overall this is a game that will no doubt have so many different types of experiences depending on the player's choice that they should all be shared and discussed. So to begin, it is important that I give you some background on my personal anticipation or even lack thereof for Tears of the Kingdom due to my previous playthrough of Breath of the Wild. So to give you an idea of my thoughts going into Tears of the Kingdom, I did a live stream the week before Tears of the Kingdom came out. I discussed my thoughts and my anticipation for Tears of the Kingdom. So take a look at this and you'll see exactly how I was feeling leading up to this game's release. If I don't sound too excited for it, it's because I'm honestly not that excited for it just yet. They haven't shown much of the game really, and the game is literally the exact same, like running on the exact same stuff as the first game was. So, and that game is 6 years old, so it's hard for me to be too excited about it. You know, I'm just being honest with you. I'm really not excited for what I've seen for the gameplay aspects of it yet. I haven't seen any dungeons, no puzzles really. I've seen lots of like the crafting stuff with your abilities with items, so that just honestly doesn't excite me very much. I was never into Minecraft or Fortnite building or anything like that, so yeah, it's not really what I'm into. But I'm trying to be, you know, keep positive about it and keep an open mind about it. So I won't know for sure until I play it. Maybe the game will blow me away, but like from what I've seen, it hasn't really excited me that much. No, the minds behind Zelda, Breath of the Wild, and Tears of the Kingdom, basically Aonuma, he really loves stamina. He loves stamina, right? And he loves to having your weapons degrade and break. He just loves that for some reason. So as I was saying, I wasn't really a fan of how the weapons would break in Breath of the Wild, and I also felt that there was a lack of direction of the story in the game. The story is very basic, it's kind of laid out for you right at the start, and all the tasks and work you had to do in Breath of the Wild just didn't feel as fulfilling as they should have felt for me personally. Even though I did still enjoy the game overall, and I did enjoy the open world aspect, being able to climb everything and having all this freedom to go anywhere in the world for a Zelda game was quite a huge leap for the series for that time. However, in my opinion, in 2017, I was actually one of those people that thought that Breath of the Wild was in fact a bit overrated. I probably would have gave it about an 8 out of 10 back then and not 10 out of 10 like a lot of these websites are giving. And on top of that, I actually enjoyed games like Horizon Zero Dawn better than Breath of the Wild. And this was coming off of being extremely hyped for Breath of the Wild for over 2 to 3 years since they announced it in 2014 for the Wii U. And I was also one of the first people to play it at E3 in 2016. I was really excited for the game, but it didn't quite live up to my expectations as a fan of Zelda and as a big fan of the original Zelda types of games where you're going into the dungeons, the big dungeon expanses, finding the big key, then fighting the epic boss, and then of course exploring the world and continuing your quests, you know, just like the original 3D Zelda games were. When Breath of the Wild took all those things out of the game, it was a very big disappointment for me personally, and I just didn't enjoy the game quite as much because of that. So going into Tears of the Kingdom, after Nintendo only showed a little bit of footage here and there for the past nearly 4 years since they announced it in E3 2019, for me, my excitement was not quite there because I just didn't see anything different enough shown of Tears of the Kingdom versus Breath of the Wild. And then Nintendo had that gameplay presentation with with Numa, showing the new building mechanic with Ultrahand, and also the fuse mechanic with the weapons, and that also didn't do anything for me when I saw the previews. It was one of those things where I'm very much aware of the trends in gaming of these days, and Minecraft came to mind, and I was thinking, man, this just doesn't look like Zelda to me. This looks more like a Minecraft meets Zelda in the Zelda universe. So having those type of mechanics didn't really excite me as far as interaction with the gameplay environment, you having to build your own boat or car and, you know, be able to traverse across the level that way. Just didn't excite me because it's just something I just don't do in games. I want to play Zelda to do the puzzles, to do the combat, to find all the secrets, to discover the mysteries of the story and fight those big epic bosses. And for this game to be seemingly focused so much on building and crafting and fusing items in your weapons and still having the breakable weapon mechanic, it just didn't look like it was something I was going to be excited for to play, which scared me because I didn't want to skip the game. But also Nintendo was charging $70 for the game as well. So I was kind of at a crossroads, but I said, hey, you know, this is Zelda, so of course I was going to play the game, and I'm so glad I did because it's a fantastic game.
What is that?
So starting up Tears of the Kingdom, the game's story grabbed me right from the beginning, much better than anything that Breath of the Wild did. They give you a lot of background information of what you're up against right away, and they give you the big motivation, which is to find Zelda or save Zelda, which in the original game, Breath of the Wild, you didn't have that type of motivation really in the story. It was more about just, you know, saving Hyrule, which is great, but this was more personal, I felt, in Tears of the Kingdom. It worked a lot better. And they give you a lot more dialogue and cutscenes as far as explaining what was going on with the history of Hyrule and the beginnings of it, going all the way back to the imprisoning war with how it started with the original king of Hyrule, all the way up to the present day in this time period for this Zelda game, which appears to be 2 to 3 years after the events of Breath of the Wild. And the reason why you can tell it's about that time range is because the characters that you come across in Tears of the Kingdom, many of them are the same characters from Breath of the Wild. However, there are certain characters that have actually grown up a little bit in their age, and you can tell possibly it's been about 2 to 3 years around that time frame since you last saw them. Now in this review, I'm not going to be discussing too many story spoilers, and you will find out for yourself, but as Nintendo themselves showed, Ganondorf is in fact your main villain in this game because they showed it in the trailers. And on top of that, everyone knows from Nintendo's own announcement that Tears of the Kingdom was going to have more traditional type of dungeons, so those are not spoilers. And there is quite a bit of story though, like I said, a lot of background information, a lot of really interesting events that happen in this game that really draw you in, and I think it's much better done than Breath of the Wild. The game still has memories to find, however, the great thing about Tears of the Kingdom is that if you don't find those memories that they lay out for you in certain side quests, you still get a very big story that the game tells you from going dungeon to dungeon without even having to do the side quests for the memories this time. The story in Breath of the Wild wasn't something that was really happening in the here and now. It was more about the outcome of what happened in the past, and you had to go find that information as you went. In Tears of the Kingdom, it's very much different. You have memories, and it gives you some background of what happened in the past, sure, but the here and now is very much the most important thing in Tears of the Kingdom, which is the great thing about the story, which really pulled me in, like I said, and made me have more motivation to complete the quests. One really odd thing I will say about the story, though, that isn't a spoiler because it's simply not in the game, but there's no mention of any of the divine beasts from Breath of the Wild. There's no real mention much at all of what happened in the previous game, simply that here's what's happening now after that. And you already are, you know, fully powered with the Master Sword, you're Link, and you already had some kind of developed relationship with Zelda. And none of that is really explained. They don't really touch upon the previous game at all. But this does make me feel like that the previous game's story was very, very minute and not very important in the grand scheme of things due to what happens in this game. It does make it feel like that in Breath of the Wild, it was simply just a prolonged type of event that you were going through just to get to the events for Tears of the Kingdom, which unfortunately does in fact make it feel like the entire game now of Breath of the Wild, and looking back on it, was kind of pointless, to be honest with you. Thankfully, Tears of the Kingdom in the here and now in 2023 definitely is very much the next full step for the Legend of Zelda series. They've done a great job in making this game feel very much standalone, regardless of what happened with Breath of the Wild, and granted, it's been 6 years since that game came out. So having such a rich, full experience in Tears of the Kingdom, I do think was well worth the wait for Zelda fans. But when it's all said and done, usually, the key aspect of any Zelda game is always the gameplay. So the gameplay is what's going to make or break Tears of the Kingdom. And this was something that for me personally in Breath of the Wild, the gameplay itself, like with the combat and even some of the puzzles, didn't really excite me that much after a while. And with Tears of the Kingdom, they made a big change in how the gameplay systems work in the combat and in the puzzle system. It feels like a completely new game, which is fantastic. And my fears about building things and the whole fuse and crafting mechanic that they introduced in Tears of the Kingdom was alleviated big time, because I actually enjoyed this in Tears of the Kingdom quite a bit. Having the complete freedom to build these machines or contraptions or whatever basically you want with the materials you have in the game to help you get across the path or to go across the water or even to climb up something higher to help you kind of get there. You can do all these things with Ultrahand by building and attaching things together with the various objects that are in the game, whether it's pieces of wood, stone, rock, anything that the game lets you actually grab. With Ultrahand, you can attach it usually to another piece of another object to make it kind of come together, pretty much like making Legos or Minecraft, right? Now, like I said, that type of gameplay never excited me in the past. However, the way the Zelda team did it here was very much in depth, in that it involves you to make the decisions you want to solve the puzzle in the way that you think is best. And a lot of times it works, even if it's not necessarily designed that way. You can actually get away with certain things that you design and solve the puzzle that way, or get across the path in a certain way that other players may try something different. And since the game's physics is used so well, the interaction between you and the game world still will work and not break the game. Actually, it will allow you to solve these things on your own in many different ways, which is an absolutely amazing aspect of this game. And quite frankly, I think that Ultrahand and the building aspect of Tears of the Kingdom might be the most ingenious implementation of this type of gameplay in any open world game in history. And without a doubt, it's going to draw so many people in to try their own types of ideas in this game. This is the principal aspect of the gameplay that sets it apart from Breath of the Wild, in my opinion. And I think other people will think so as well when they play it. It really draws you in and gives you an experience like no other Zelda game ever has done before, and it does it so well. You almost don't even recognize that you're doing this in a Zelda game. It just feels like it's part of Zelda after a few hours of play, which is also an amazing testament to the type of design and thought and care that the Zelda team put into this game. The 6 years of development time definitely shows here with the amount of attention to detail and painstaking effort they put into just the Ultrahand gameplay. All without any bugs or any type of crazy, the game-breaking glitches. I didn't experience any of those things in this game in my 135 hours. Not one game bug or glitch or freeze or anything that I experienced in this game. Now granted, I did see a couple of people online say they experienced a slight glitch, like maybe a horse got clipped through the ground or something like that, but nothing really game breaking. Me personally though, I can attest 100% that I did not experience any glitches whatsoever, which is absolutely incredible for a game of this size, which yet again is a testament to the painstaking playtesting that Nintendo no doubt had for many years in this game. It is as close enough to perfect in terms of how the open world interacts with you, more so than any game I've ever played. Now, of course, it doesn't end with Ultrahand and the building aspect. Nintendo also has a new ability called Ascend and Rewind as well. Essentially, you can ascend to any open surface that's above you to the next level on top of the ground or higher up in a mountain. And this is also something I had to get used to. It took quite a bit for me to actually realize when I was playing the game that there's so much verticality in Tears of the Kingdom that if you're ever stuck in a certain puzzle or in a certain area and not sure what to do, make sure you think vertically and look around, look above you, and remember that you can actually ascend to another level, and there might be something you can do on top of that to connect the certain puzzle or to get to the next area you need to access, because maybe there's something blocking you there on the ground level, but if you ascend, actually go above that and around it, you can solve your particular situation that way. And that is another huge key aspect that is completely different from Breath of the Wild, is that Tears of the Kingdom introduced so much different verticality, and even in the cave system where you go and ascend up out of the caves, and of course going way into the sky area of Tears of the Kingdom, which is all connected to the main ground area of Hyrule, plus the depths where you go way deep down into the underground of Hyrule, which also is a completely different world from the main level of Hyrule as well, introducing all kinds of different aspects as far as what you need to do with your quests, types of items you collect, like with the pose, you get all your pose down in the depths, which also serves as something you can use as an upgrade later when you turn those pose into certain prayer stones. The amount of things you can do in this game can seem overwhelming, but we'll talk about that more as we continue. But also, getting back to the abilities, using Rewind can also help you solve many of the puzzles you come in contact with, especially in the shrines. Now, speaking of shrines, the shrines are back and in full force. There's actually more shrines in Tears of the Kingdom than there are in Breath of the Wild. However, the shrines this time are a lot more varied, and they have a lot of different types of shrines that you'll come in contact with, including shrines that you actually do outside of the shrine. Now, basically what that means is the game will have you do a lot of activities that are outside the shrine, and then when you do access the shrine itself, like when you open the door to it, all you have to do at that point is get the Light of Blessing. And just like Breath of the Wild, Lights of Blessing, those little light orbs that you collect from the shrines, are still the primary way that you get more hearts and stamina by turning those into the goddess statues scattered across the world in Hyrule. And even though the shrines do have more interesting puzzles and different types of them in this game, I did find that there is a disparity on the objectives that the game was trying to have you do as far as your time is concerned. Some of these shrines take 2 to 3 times longer to complete than other shrines, for example. However, the reward is still just 1 Light of Blessing per shrine. No matter how long it takes you to do that shrine, it's still the same reward. And some of these shrines require you to destroy gauntlets of enemies by figuring out the best way to defeat them, and that can take quite a lot longer than solving a simple puzzle and then getting the Light of Blessing pretty quickly. And on top of that, they have other shrines that require you to be outside and actually find the green crystal that goes with the shrine to one side of the level to the other to basically get it back to where the shrine is, and that can also take quite a long time to figure out. And the longer you play this game, the hours and hours and hours do mount up, and you will make mistakes along the way. You may drop an object, you have to start all over again, and that can be a big time killer for some of these shrines, henceforth making the reward being just 1 Light of Blessing feel very minute, when sometimes these shrines take less than 30 seconds to solve, and all of a sudden you have your Light of Blessing. So that's one thing they could have improved upon with Tears of the Kingdom. It would have been nice perhaps if some of these shrines would actually give you 2 Lights of Blessing instead of just 1, for the sake of how long some of these take to complete. But for the overwhelming majority of the time, the shrines are extremely fun, and in fact, when I played this game live for the first time, my very first shrine that I did live on stream, I solved the shrine in a way that the game definitely wasn't intending for me to do. Take a look at this.
Yeah, the music is chill. Let me see if this will work. All right, can I just like walk on this or not? I don't know if I don't know if I'm supposed to do this. Wow. Okay. I'm not sure if that was the right way to do it, but
Now, granted, you can't do every shrine like that. There's not a simple, easy cheating solution for every single shrine there is. However, there is ways that you can kind of cheese the system, so to speak, and solve shrines in a way that the game wasn't necessarily expecting you to, which is the greatness of the design of the game coming through, because it gives you more freedom and less limits as far as what the developer are imposing on you. Instead, Nintendo has taken the opposite approach and allowed the player to actually decide how they're going to solve a puzzle. If it's actually possible to do in the game, you can solve these puzzles in many different ways, which adds not only to the enjoyment of the game, but also the replayability of those shrines later on. If you come back, you can try different methods to get the same result. So yes, shrines are back in full force in Tears of the Kingdom. They are more varied, like we said, and they are basically mini dungeons. However, there are actual dungeons in Tears of the Kingdom this time, as opposed to Breath of the Wild that were not actual dungeons, really. They were basically just larger shrines, so to speak. But in Tears of the Kingdom, these are full themed dungeons, so you can definitely expect elemental type of dungeons being used in this game to full effect. And these dungeons, of course, are a huge step up from anything they did in Breath of the Wild, but they do fall short a little bit of the previous dungeons in past Zelda games, like an Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, Twilight Princess, Wind Waker. This game does not have dungeons quite as good as those games. However, some of the dungeons, especially I would say two of them that stand out in my mind, they do come really close to that classic Zelda dungeon. However, there's no like big key that you find to unlock to go fight the final boss. It's very much handled in a very set way for every dungeon, which is kind of similar to the big key aspect from the original Zelda games, where every single dungeon has that big key. There is kind of a set pattern that you follow in each dungeon in Tears of the Kingdom, which is predictable, but how you solve these puzzles is different in every single dungeon, and the theme is different, and they're much bigger than anything they did in Breath of the Wild. So overall, I would say the dungeons are a success and very much enjoyable in Tears of the Kingdom. A good balance of size and complexity, plus challenge and puzzles, I would say. Not quite as good as the original 3D Zelda games, but very close. And one thing to note about the dungeons in Tears of the Kingdom is that after you beat each dungeon, you will get an assist character that is optional, but I do think the most used assist character for most people will be Tulin, which will help you give extra gusts of wind in the sky when you're using your paraglider, which comes in really handy to reach those far off shrines. If they're just out of reach, if you're low on stamina, for example, if you don't have any stamina potions, you can use Tulin to basically give you that extra gust of wind to get you where you need to go. One thing I do think was improved upon quite a bit in Tears of the Kingdom that makes it feel much more random and varied is in fact the combat. Now, the one-on-one combat of Link when you have just your standard weapons in Tears of the Kingdom is pretty much exactly the same as Breath of the Wild. However, the big difference this time is when you actually fuse different items that you find in the environment to your weapons or to your shield. All these things can enhance your abilities, give you more attack power, give you more defense. To Link, for example, you can make all kinds of different combinations. You can attach ice and fire and water to your arrows, and all of a sudden you have, fire arrows, ice arrows, you name it, you can do it in this game. It gives you so much variety that it feels like you can almost do anything on the battlefield, and it's not limited at all, really. It's only limited by when your weapon breaks. However, I will say that aspect is improved as far as your weapon breaking, because when you do fuse these items to your weapons do last longer, a lot longer actually in some cases, than they did in Breath of the Wild. The game almost forces your hand to use the fuse ability, because if you don't use the fuse ability, you're doing yourself a disservice, because if you don't fuse these items to make these swords and spears, these actually will degrade faster than they did in Breath of the Wild. So that's how the game gets you to use fuse, because by doing so you get all the reward and there's basically no negative side to doing it. The more that you use the fuse ability, the better you are going to be in combat, and you're going to have a lot stronger weapons because of it. You'll find certain rocks and spikes and even diamonds, for example, that you can attach to your swords and give them longer durability because of that. So even though the weapon durability aspect is really not that great in my opinion, it's much better in Tears of the Kingdom due to the fuse ability. Plus, when you do eventually get the Master Sword, yes, the Master Sword still runs out of power and has to recharge. But the awesome thing about the Master Sword in Tears of the Kingdom is that you can actually fuse items to the Master Sword as well, further increasing its own power and durability, thus making the Master Sword the principal weapon to use, especially in a boss fight. One thing to note about the fuse mechanic, however, is that if you want to equip an item to your sword or spear or any weapon that you have that is a melee weapon, you need to actually select it in the menu and drop it in front of you and then fuse it to your weapon. This can be more cumbersome if you're trying to do it during combat, so I do suggest that you do this outside of combat and be ready for your encounters that way. But if you are using your bow and arrow, you can fuse them during combat very easily, and maybe in future Zelda games Nintendo will bring this back and make it easier to fuse your items to your melee weapons during combat, but for now, that is the way you need to do it. So really, there's so much benefits to the new abilities that Nintendo has added to this gameplay that it makes it far better than Breath of the Wild. Much more engaging gameplay and combat that it really encourages you to keep playing and trying different things, much more so than you did in Breath of the Wild, at least in my experience. And also traversal in this game, of course, as we know, you can go in the sky, you can go in the depths, you can go way underneath the ground, the surface, but also the traversal, like when it rains, seems to be a lot less cumbersome in Tears of the Kingdom than it was in Breath of the Wild. I remember having a big problem in Breath of the Wild, many people did, with the weather system and the rain causing you to stop in your tracks and not able to get where you need to go. They're using the rain way too much as a limiting factor in Breath of the Wild, but in Tears of the Kingdom, it really has been lightened up quite a bit. And on top of that, you can get clothes that actually help you stick more onto the walls, even on slippery surfaces. So the rain really is a non-factor in Tears of the Kingdom because of that, and due to it just being lessened overall. There still is lightning that strikes that you still have to take off your armor when you're in the rain and everything, but it does feel like the rain is much less cumbersome in Tears of the Kingdom, which is a huge plus, because that was one drawback that I felt kind of weighed it down a little bit in Breath of the Wild and some of the traversal in that game. Horseback riding returns in full force in Tears of the Kingdom. You do seem to have less of it than you did in Breath of the Wild. However, it's still the exact same controls. So if you didn't have any issue with how the horse worked in Breath of the Wild, you'll have no issue at all with Tears of the Kingdom. It's exactly the same, which for me actually is a slight negative, because I did feel that the horseback riding in Breath of the Wild was very stiff and slow to respond, and you still can't actually pick up items while you're on your horse. You still have to actually jump off your horse completely and go pick up items and then jump back on your horse, gain speed again, and start traveling again. That's one thing I wish they would have improved upon. Make it more like Elden Ring or Ghost of Tsushima, where you can actually pick up items while you're still on your horse. You don't actually have to get off and essentially waste your time. Because like I said, this game could last you hundreds of hours and you still have many more things to do in the game. So any time wasters like that are unnecessary, I think could have been fixed. But of course, you know, Nintendo kept it exactly the same. Maybe to keep that familiarity with people who play Breath of the Wild, you'll just pick it up and play, you'll know exactly what to do. Which also applies to the combat controls themselves. The game controls pretty much exactly the same as Breath of the Wild with the combat, but Nintendo yet again didn't really give any options to change any of the controls. The way the game controls does feel a little backwards for me personally, especially if you're coming from a game like Jedi Survivor. The way you dodge and jump and attack in a lot of these modern third-person action games are simply different than how they're done in Tears of the Kingdom. They're actually different buttons on your controller. Yeah, and also honestly the controls are they take so much to get used to, because I'm so used to playing different types of games like this. So I'm hitting the wrong button when I'm trying to dodge, and I'm just getting hit because I'm not dodging. Takes a while to get used to for me. I just want to see if there's an ability to actually change swap jump controls. Assign jump to B and dash and other actions to X. Would that do anything? See, I wish they would give you an option to just do your own controls. I don't know if that would actually help me much. Yeah, so I'd like to have jump be the A button and dash can be the B or the X button. But having jump be just be the B button is kind of weird, and having jump be the X button is weird too. So if you're used to playing those type of games and you come to Tears of the Kingdom, it's going to take you quite a few hours probably to get muscle memory built up to get used to the combat in this game. It's almost like Nintendo simply just pushed pause on Breath of the Wild and pushed unpause from 2017 to 2023 on the control aspect and did absolutely nothing to them, which is unfortunate because if they gave you the option to actually switch around the button configuration a little bit, it could make things a lot more comfortable for you if you're used to playing the more modern type of controls in games from today. Now, of course, it feels like basically 90% of this game is based on exploring the world, right? So there are a ton of side quests to do in Tears of the Kingdom. There's a lot more dialogue to pay attention to, a lot more talking NPCs, a lot more story to pay attention to as well. It can feel extremely overwhelming for a new player, and if you feel that way, I don't blame you, because the game is gigantic, and if you have a long list of things to do in a game like this, it can feel like you're basically never going to beat the game. Now, one way that I suggest that you tackle this if you're new to this game is giving yourself little goals every play session. Like I was saying, I got 135 hours in this game. I played for 18 days straight. I gave myself little goals to accomplish in every single play session. Like, I want to get done a certain amount of shrines, maybe a dungeon here or there, a certain amount of side quests, certain upgrades I want to go for example. So this game gives you all the side quests you can possibly imagine in an open world type of game. The only downside to the side quests is that a lot of these side quests just don't feel very important to do. Very basic type of side quests that you had to do in this game for the most part. Some of them were interesting and some of them were very much required to do if you wanted to upgrade Link, for example, which includes the quest of you finding all the great fairies, because the great fairies actually allow you to upgrade each individual piece of armor or clothes that you have on Link. So if you are feeling like you're getting hit and one-shotted quite a bit, pay attention to what the NPCs are saying and the quests in each village to upgrade Link in a way that you need him to be for you to get through the game a lot easier. And even then, if you don't upgrade Link, if you don't find all those great fairies and do all the upgrading that you can to the character, the gameplay and combat, once you get used to the controls and everything, is pretty much on the easy side of things to the low intermediate side of things if you're used to these types of action games. Most of my deaths in Tears of the Kingdom were due to my own mistakes, or just me pushing the wrong button because I just didn't have some of that muscle memory built up yet for the controls. But for the actual combat, the enemies have a very slow reaction time, and each and every enemy that you fight has a very strong, noticeable telegraph of their attack. So I don't think many people will have too much problem with the combat in this game. Even if they don't get all the upgrades, you still should be able to beat this game with some decent challenge along the way, but nothing that's going to be too hard for you to beat. And for me personally, the game did feel a tad on the easy side because I did get the upgrades. And if you have a fully upgraded Link, you can pretty much mow through all the enemies in this game, including the bosses, with ease. So getting back to what I said at the beginning of this video, the reason why I decided to beat the game was basically due to that, is that I did feel like I was overpowered at that point. And it didn't feel like me continuing on in the game and getting even more upgraded and more powerful was going to do me any good, because it was going to make the game just continually easier and easier. And for me, I enjoy a challenge, and I wanted to see what the final boss's challenge was going to be without me completely dominating the fight. I wanted to have some challenge to see exactly what their pattern was and what the correct way to fight them was, without just me spamming the attack button and getting through them, which actually some bosses pretty much let you do, just spam the attack button, which makes it way too easy when you're overpowered, like I felt that I was in my playthrough. So for me personally, that was where some of the game kind of faltered a little bit towards the end, was that I didn't feel like it was necessary for me to do any more side quests because I was completely overpowered. Plus, on top of that, the side quests were not interesting enough to draw me in for me to do them in the first place. So that was just one slight negative for me personally for this playthrough, was due to that. I wasn't really motivated to do the rest of the side quests, and I saw no reason to either. And some of the side quests in Tears of the Kingdom are not actually even mentioned as side quests. They're just things that you can do to gain like more Korok seeds and get more money, like the whole thing you need to do with putting up the signs for that Mr. Addison guy for the President Hudson thing. And of course, finding all the missing Korok friends and getting to their buddies, getting more Korok seeds. Those things are not even side quests. Those are just tasks that you can do to get more of those items. And for me in my playthrough, after about 30 or 40 hours in, I kind of stopped caring about those because there's so many of them to do that you kind of just, say, oh, I'll just come back to these guys later. I'll do them every now and then, because they just didn't really seem very necessary for me. Granted, they're there, but they didn't really feel consequential to my journey or to my mission to have them be important to do. And at that point, it got to be so many different items, so many different things to collect. It almost felt similar to a collectathon, like a Donkey Kong 64 type of thing, where you have all these collectibles to get, but do you really need them? And the answer, of course, is no, you don't. They're just there for you to get so you can complete a certain amount of items, so you can upgrade a certain thing in your inventory to a certain level, basically. And it got to the point where I was so overpowered and there were so many things for me to get, I just didn't see the need to do these extra things. Now, granted, I played it for 18 days straight. Likely I'll come back and want to do more of these things gradually as I go. This game's going to be around forever, right? So for the here and now, those quests didn't really interest me to do any further. But when I return to the game later, we'll see how I feel about it then. But for my first playthrough, those particular aspects of the game did not really feel valuable or very interesting. Now let's finally talk about the graphics of Tears of the Kingdom. Tears of the Kingdom, I do believe, is the best looking open world Switch game that there is. And some people will argue that maybe Xenoblade Chronicles 3 looks a little bit better than Tears of the Kingdom, but I will still give the edge just a little bit to Tears of the Kingdom. They're actually rendering a sky world, a land world, and an underworld, and you can actually transition from the sky world to the underworld all at the same time seamlessly without there being any loading screens whatsoever. But one edge I will give to Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is that the trees are rendered much better in Xenoblade Chronicles 3 than they are in Tears of the Kingdom. By far, the tree rendering in Tears of the Kingdom and in Breath of the Wild are the weakest aspect of the graphics. When the game is not rendering trees, everything for the most part in Tears of the Kingdom looks great. But when it renders those trees, for some reason those stand out as being very ugly and undetailed, especially in the open world when it renders them. This low detail effect of the trees and the draw distance is definitely a hardware limitation. In fact, it reminds me very clearly of the 2006 game Elder Scrolls Oblivion, where you see these very undetailed and almost like formless blobs of background objects with rendered trees on top of them, which looks very out of place and strange looking. But this is exactly what they're dealing with many years ago with limited hardware, limited RAM. And this is one of those situations where the Switch hardware is holding back the vision and art style of Tears of the Kingdom, and where a new piece of hardware would actually fix this type of issue in the game and be less distracting. And occasionally in this game you will find some areas where you will discover that some textures simply are not there or rendered, that they could easily patch in later, but there are certain objects and areas in the game that you'll see that textures simply weren't rendered correctly. However, when it's doing things like mountains and caves, up close when you're inside, these areas and in the dungeons, the game looks fantastic. It has a really nice depth of field effect that you have, especially with fire, and it does have noticeably better lighting than Breath of the Wild. It has a very noticeable global illumination effect on the areas around you, especially when you shoot those bright bloom seas in the depths. It lights up the area and it's all real time, similar to what they used in Metroid Prime Remastered for that beautiful lighting effects they had in that game. So when all those things are working for Tears of the Kingdom, the game has some of the best graphics on the console. Now, personally, I would still give the edge to Metroid Prime Remastered as far as the best looking game on the Switch. And yes, I understand it's not an open world game, but as far as visual flair and how impressive the game looks, you gotta give it to Metroid Prime Remastered. The game runs at 60 frames. It has a cleaner picture. I did notice in Tears of the Kingdom that the game, even though it runs at 900p and looks clean for the most part and sharp, it does drop resolution noticeably and looks more jaggy than Metroid Prime Remastered. So it may drop to 720p while docked and target 900p, but It definitely does not look quite as good as Metroid Prime Remastered in its image quality, and the frame rate is targeting 30 and not 60, with drops as low as 20 frames per second with using Ultrahand in some circumstances. Now, the drops in frame rate are nowhere near as bad as some people were trying to make it out to be online. The game was near locked at 30 frames per second 90% of the time, only occasionally in certain combat situations when there's a lot of enemies on screen, a lot of explosions, and using Ultrahand at the same time in some or certain aspects. Yes, the game would slow down a bit, but it would also recover really fast as well and go right back up to a locked 30 frames. So overall, it wasn't a stuttery mess or anything like that. It was very much consistent, and any of the frame rate drops when you are using Ultrahand, it doesn't really affect your gameplay because you're already moving at a slow pace when you're using Ultrahand. So only when you're in combat, if the game does slow down, it could affect your gameplay experience, but like I said, very few and far between frame drops for Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. And in regards to the sound effects and the music and the voice, I would say it's a 10 out of 10. The music in this game is absolutely fantastic. Some of the best tracks I've ever heard in a Zelda game is in Tears of the Kingdom. And I don't want to spoil it for you, of course. I'm not going to play it here for you, but there's a certain part of the game where the music and what's going on the screen is so masterfully done that you'd be hard pressed not to get a little tear in your eyes. You know, it's really, really good, really fantastic music. Some of the best, like I said, in Zelda. And the voiceovers are done really well. The voice acting by Ganondorf and Zelda, they're done very, very well in this game. All the extra characters have very nice inflections, different types of voices. They very much bring a lot of life to the game. But yeah, it is getting very noticeable that Link himself doesn't say a word in this game. I do wish that they will give Link a full voice acted appearance in a future Zelda game. I think it's time. And I do wholeheartedly think in this particular game, in Tears of the Kingdom, it was sorely missed that he didn't say anything, especially with his relationship with Zelda. If Link actually has some lines of dialogue, that could have enhanced that relationship even more so than what they already did without Link talking. So just imagine what they could do in the future for that dynamic between Link and Zelda. So overall, in my experience, I do think Tears of the Kingdom far outdoes Breath of the Wild in so many aspects. The only slight unfortunate thing is that this is the exact same game world as far as the ground level of Hyrule. So you will have a lot of repeat areas that are the exact same geometry, exact same layouts, which is slightly disappointing in my opinion. But overall, it is definitely a brand new game. Even though there's so many reused assets and so many reused places, all the content itself is brand new from head to toe. It's completely new story, new everything. Thus making, in my opinion, like I said, Breath of the Wild basically not needed for you to play. This is the Zelda game to play on the Switch. And that's it. That's all there is to it. I don't think anybody would actually need to play Breath of the Wild. If you've never played it before and you have a choice, definitely play Tears of the Kingdom. There are still some noticeable flaws in this game and the design of the game as well. Some of the things that Nintendo and the Zelda team did not actually improve upon from Breath of the Wild, like the horseback riding, some of the imbalance of the shrines and how they didn't actually reward you for your time on a lot of those, and also not having very valuable side quests. I think all those things just bring it down a little bit of a notch there, but not too much because of the way they implemented the Ultrahand is such a revolutionary way to do an open world game. That brings it right up there with that high score. So I still have to give it about a 9.5 out of 10, which is a fantastic game. It's really difficult to find way too much wrong with this game. Much better than Breath of the Wild. This was a Zelda game, open world game that I wanted when I played it at E3 before it was released. That was what I was hoping for way back then. So it seems like I've been waiting for this game for over 7 years. So it looks like I finally got that Zelda open world game that I've always wanted. Tears of the Kingdom is that game. Thank you guys so much for watching this review. If you did enjoy it, please hit the like button for me. Leave me a comment. Let me know your thoughts on The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom.